Stand up. ID. Now.
I'm eating lunch. You have no reasonable suspicion.
You match the call. Don't play lawyer with me.
I am the lawyer, Department of Justice, Civil Rights. Touch me and you're violating federal law.
Cool story. Turn around.
I am not resisting. This is an unlawful arrest. Record this.
Officer Brody Miller had been wearing the badge of the North Charleston Police Department for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career, humiliate his superiors, and cost the taxpayers of South Carolina $6.4 million. He was 28 years old, physically imposing, and possessed of that dangerous combination of limited life experience and absolute authority. He walked with a strut that suggested the ground should be grateful for his boots, and he operated under the assumption that his perception of reality was the only one that mattered. On a humid Tuesday afternoon in Oakwood Park, a sprawling green space surrounded by historic homes and weeping willows, Miller received a dispatch call regarding a suspicious individual refusing to leave a public bench. The individual in question was Marcus Thorne, a 54-year-old senior litigation counsel for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Thorne was not loitering. He was eating a pastrami sandwich and reviewing a digital case file on his tablet, preparing to audit the very police department Miller worked for. What Officer Miller did next, ignoring Thorne's calm demeanor, disregarding the law, and arresting a high-ranking federal official in front of stunned onlookers, would become the definitive case study on how unchecked bias rots law enforcement from the inside out. Before we get into the details of this catastrophe, tell me where you are listening from today. If you believe truth is the best disinfectant for corruption, please hit that subscribe button. We need your support to keep telling these stories. Oakwood Park is the crown jewel of the district, a place where the old money of the city mingles with the new tech wealth. It is a landscape of manicured hedges, iron-wrought benches, and an unspoken code of conduct that values quiet conformity above all else. It was 1:15 p.m. The sun was high and bright, filtering through the Spanish moss hanging from the ancient oaks. The park was dotted with nannies pushing strollers, joggers in expensive activewear, and corporate types taking phone calls on the walking paths. Marcus Thorne had chosen a bench near the duck pond specifically for its tranquility. He had arrived in the city late the previous night, his flight delayed by storms in D.C., and he had spent the morning meeting with community leaders who had described a pattern of harassment by local patrol officers. Thorne needed a moment of silence before his 2:00 p.m. appointment with the chief of police. He was a man of immense dignity, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Officer Miller's annual gear allowance. He had spent 25 years in the Justice Department dismantling systemic corruption in housing, voting rights, and policing. He was the man the Attorney General called when a department needed to be taken apart and rebuilt from the studs up. But as he sat there wiping a crumb from his silk tie and scrolling through a PDF of arrest statistics, he wasn't a powerful federal attorney. He was simply a black man in a suit sitting in a park where someone decided he didn't belong. That someone was Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was 58 years old, the kind of woman who sat on the board of the Homeowners Association and viewed the public park across the street from her Victorian renovation as an extension of her front porch. She had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years, watching it shift and change, and her anxiety about outsiders had grown with every passing year. She stood at her bay window, peeling back the sheer curtain just enough to peer out. She had been watching Marcus Thorne for 20 minutes. In her mind, the narrative was already written. He wasn't eating lunch. He was loitering. He wasn't reading a legal brief. He was casing the houses for a break-in. He didn't look like the neighbors she knew, the doctors, the architects, the retirees. To Eleanor Thorne's presence was a glitch in the matrix of her curated world. She watched him tap on his tablet and frowned. Why wasn't he at an office? Why was he just sitting there? The longer she watched, the more her unfounded fear calcified into certainty. She picked up her phone, bypassing the non-emergency line she should have used, and dialed 911 directly. Her voice was trembling, a practiced affectation of distress. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher asked. Yes, I'm at 400 Oakwood Drive, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. There's a man across the street in the park. He's been there for half an hour. He's watching the houses. I think he's checking to see who is home. The dispatcher, trained to filter bias but overworked and understaffed, pressed for details. Is he threatening anyone, ma'am? Does he have a weapon? Eleanor hesitated. She knew that saying no might result in a slow response or no response at all. She needed the police to come and remove the anomaly. He's acting very aggressive, she lied, a fabrication that flowed easily. He shouted at a woman walking her dog earlier, and he keeps putting his hand in his jacket pocket. I'm afraid to leave my house. That was the trigger. The call was coded not as a welfare check or a suspicious person, but as a potential threat to public safety. The call went out over the radio. Unit 4 Alpha, respond to Oakwood Park. Subject is a black male, 50s, dark suit. Reporting party states, subject is aggressive, possibly armed, casing residences. Officer Brody Miller was 3 blocks away, idling in the parking lot of a convenience store halfway through a lukewarm energy drink. When the call crackled over his radio, he didn't hear a request for investigation. He heard an opportunity for action. Brody Miller had a reputation within the precinct, though not the one he thought he had. He believed he was a proactive officer, a hard charger who kept the streets clean. His sergeants, however, viewed him as a liability in waiting. In his 6 years on the force, Miller had accrued 14 internal complaints. Most were for discourtesy, cursing at motorists, belittling teenagers, but 4 were for excessive force. He had a tendency to turn simple traffic stops into physical altercations. He was the type of officer who took a question as an insult and a refusal as a threat. His personnel file was thick with counseling memos, those bureaucratic slaps on the wrist that allowed the department to say they addressed the behavior without actually stopping it. Miller had never been suspended, never lost a day of pay. He had learned that if he wrote the report creatively enough, if he used the right buzzwords like furtive movement and combative stance, the system would protect him. He was a hammer and the world was full of nails. When Miller heard the dispatch about the man in Oakwood Park, his mind immediately began to profile the suspect. Aggressive, casing houses, probably a career criminal trying to blend in by wearing a suit. Miller had seen that before, con men dressing up to lower suspicion. He threw his cruiser into gear and flipped on his lights, cutting through the midday traffic with a sense of righteous urgency. He didn't turn on his siren. He wanted the element of surprise. He wanted to catch the guy in the act of whatever he was doing. Miller pulled up to the curb of the park at 1:24 p.m., the tires of his cruiser crunching loudly against the gravel. He saw the subject immediately. A black man sitting on a bench, legs crossed, tablet in hand, looking entirely too comfortable. Miller exited the vehicle, leaving the door open. He adjusted his duty belt, resting his hand near his holstered weapon, a gesture of dominance he didn't even realize he was making. He didn't observe from a distance. He didn't look for the aggressive behavior the caller had claimed. He marched across the grass, cutting a direct line toward the bench. Marcus Thorne heard the car, but didn't look up immediately. He was in the middle of a paragraph detailing a trend of unconstitutional stops in the city's 4th precinct. It was only when a shadow fell over his screen that he raised his eyes. He saw a young officer, thick-necked and red-faced, standing 6 feet away, stance wide, hand hovering near his gun. Thorne, a veteran of federal law enforcement oversight, read the officer's body language instantly. Aggression, impatience, poor training. Thorne slowly lowered the tablet to his lap, keeping his hands visible. He didn't smile, but he remained calm. "Good afternoon, officer." Thorne said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that had commanded federal courtrooms for 2 decades. "Can I help you?" Miller didn't return the greeting. He stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "Stand up," Miller ordered. It wasn't a request. Thorne remained seated. He took a slow breath, centering himself. He knew the law better than Miller knew the back of his own hand. "Officer," Thorne said, "I am enjoying my lunch. Unless I am being detained for a specific crime, I prefer to remain seated. What is the nature of your inquiry?" Miller blinked. He wasn't used to pushback, certainly not from someone he had already decided was a suspect. The vocabulary "nature of your inquiry" grated on him. It sounded like a challenge. "We got a call about a guy matching your description, harassing people, and acting suspicious. Let me see your ID." Thorne looked around the empty park area. The nearest person was a jogger 100 yards away. "I haven't spoken to a soul, officer. I'm eating a sandwich. As for my identification, South Carolina is not a stop-and-identify state, unless you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed. A vague call about suspicious behavior does not meet that threshold." Miller's face flushed a deeper shade of red. This was the moment where a good officer would have paused. A good officer would have assessed the situation, the expensive suit, the calm demeanor, the tablet, the lack of any victims. But Miller wasn't a good officer. He was a man who felt his authority slipping, and he was desperate to grab it back. "I'm not asking you for a law lesson," Miller snapped, stepping even closer, his shadow completely engulfing Thorne. "I'm telling you to give me your ID. You're loitering in a public park, and you fit the description of a suspect. Now stand up, or I will make you stand up." Thorne carefully placed his tablet into his leather briefcase on the bench beside him. He moved with deliberate slowness, broadcasting that he was not a threat. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice hardening just a fraction, "I am going to give you a chance to walk away. You are making a mistake. I am a federal employee here on official business. I am not loitering. I am taking a meal break, which is my legal right in a public space. If you continue down this path, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights, and you will regret it." "Federal employee," Miller scoffed. He had heard it all before. Suspects claiming to be lawyers, doctors, the mayor's nephew. It was always a lie. "Yeah, and I'm the King of England. Last chance. ID. Now." Miller's hand moved to his handcuffs. Thorne realized that rationality had left the conversation. He was no longer dealing with a public servant. He was dealing with an ego with a badge. He decided to try one last time to de-escalate to save this young man from his own incompetence. "My credentials are in my jacket pocket," Thorne said clearly. "I am a senior litigation counsel for the Department of Justice. I am the federal monitor assigned to the audit of this police department. If you touch me, you are assaulting a federal officer." It was a warning that should have frozen Miller in his tracks. The mention of the DOJ audit, a rumor that had been circulating in the locker rooms for weeks, should have rung a bell. But Miller was too far gone. He heard the words, but his brain filtered them as deception. "Get up!" Miller shouted. He lunged forward, grabbing Thorne by the lapel of his expensive charcoal suit. He yanked the older man upward. Thorne didn't fight back physically, but he didn't help either. He went limp, forcing Miller to haul his dead weight. The sandwich fell to the grass. The briefcase tipped over. "I am not resisting," Thorne said loudly, projecting his voice toward the street where a few pedestrians had stopped to watch. "I am complying under duress. Witness this." Miller spun Thorne around, twisting his arm behind his back with unnecessary force. Thorne winced as his shoulder joint was torqued, but he kept his face stoic. He felt the cold steel of the handcuffs snap onto his wrists. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, loitering, and resisting a lawful order." Miller panted, the adrenaline dumping into his system, making his hands shake. He tightened the cuffs too tight. Thorne felt the metal bite into his skin. "Officer, these restraints are excessive. I have offered no physical resistance." Thorne stated, his voice devoid of fear, filled only with a cold, clinical observation. "Shut up," Miller spat. He shoved Thorne toward the patrol car. Across the street, Eleanor Vance was watching from her window. She felt a surge of validation. "See, she thought I was right. He was a criminal. The police are taking him away. She didn't know she had just cost her city millions. She didn't know that the man being shoved into the back seat of the cruiser had been appointed by the United States District Court to ensure constitutional policing. She just saw a black man in handcuffs and felt safe. The ride to the precinct was a study in contrasts. In the front seat, Officer Miller was riding a high of self-righteousness, typing into his dash computer, radioing dispatch that he had one male in custody. In the back, sitting uncomfortably with his hands pinned behind him, Marcus Thorne was silent. He was memorizing everything. The time of arrest, 1:32 p.m. The speed of the vehicle. The fact that Miller didn't buckle Thorne's seatbelt, a violation of department policy. The way Miller was humming along to the radio, completely oblivious to the radioactive material he was transporting. Thorne closed his eyes and began drafting the legal complaint in his head. He cataloged the counts: false arrest, false imprisonment, battery deprivation of rights under color of law, 42 U.S. Code Section 1983. He thought about the audit meeting he was missing. The chief of police would be wondering where he was. The irony was almost perfect. He had come to investigate whether the department profiled minority citizens, and before he could even hold his first meeting, he had become Exhibit A. They arrived at the North Charleston precinct at 1:45 p.m. Miller pulled into the Sallyport, the garage door rumbling shut behind them. He hauled Thorne out of the car. Thorne's suit was wrinkled, his tie askew grass stains on his polished shoes. Miller marched him through the secure doors and into the booking area. The station was buzzing with the midday shift change. Officers were swapping gear, drinking coffee, chatting. The noise died down as Miller paraded his capture through the room. He walked Thorne up to the high desk, where the desk sergeant, a man named Thomas Grady, sat. Sergeant Grady was 59 years old. He was 3 months away from retirement. He had seen everything done, everything, and had no patience for rookie mistakes. He was looking down at a clipboard, reviewing the daily briefing notes. "What you got, Miller?" Grady asked without looking up, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. "Disorderly and resisting," Miller announced proudly. "Guy was loitering in Oakwood Park, refused ID, tried to claim he was a Fed." Grady sighed. He hated contempt of cop arrests. They were paperwork nightmares. He looked up, ready to chew Miller out for bringing in a nuisance arrest. His eyes landed on Marcus Thorne. Grady froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he was about to faint. He blinked, hoping his eyes were playing tricks on him. They weren't. He recognized the man standing in front of him. Not from the street, but from the photo that had been taped to the briefing room podium that very morning. The photo of the Federal Monitor. The man who held the fate of the entire department in his hands. Grady stood up slowly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. The room went silent. "Miller," Grady whispered, his voice trembling. "What did you do?" Miller looked confused. "I told you, Sarge. He was loitering, refused to identify." Grady walked around the desk. He didn't look at Miller. He looked at Thorne. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked at the expensive suit. "Sir," Grady said to Thorne, his tone respectful, almost fearful. "I am Sergeant Grady. May I ask your name?" Thorne looked Grady in the eye. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am the senior litigation counsel for the DOJ. I have a meeting with your chief in..." Thorne glanced at the wall clock. 10 minutes ago. Officer Miller here refused to look at my credentials." Miller let out a nervous laugh. "Come on, Sarge. You believe this guy. He's just saying that." Grady turned on Miller. The fury in his eyes was something Miller had never seen before. "Shut your mouth, Miller. Shut your mouth right now." Grady turned back to Thorne. "Sir, I am going to remove these handcuffs immediately. This is a terrible misunderstanding." Grady reached for his key. "No," Thorne said. The word cracked like a whip. Grady stopped key hovering. "Sir, do not take them off." Thorne said calmly. Officer Miller decided that I was a criminal. He decided that I needed to be processed. So process me. I want my mugshot taken. I want my fingerprints rolled. I want the record of this arrest to be absolute and undeniable. Because when I file the civil rights lawsuit against this city, I want the jury to see exactly how your officers treat a federal official when they think nobody is watching. Sir, please, Grady pleaded. We can fix this. I'll get the captain. Get the captain, Thorne said. But the cuffs stay on until he gets here. Miller was starting to sweat now. The reality was seeping in through the cracks of his arrogance. He looked from Grady to Thorne. He saw the quality of the suit. He heard the authority in the voice. Oh God, he thought. What have I done? Captain Reynolds was in his office reviewing the presentation he was about to give to the Federal Monitor. He wanted to show that the department was making progress, that the bad old days were behind them. His door flew open. It was Sergeant Grady, breathless. Captain, you need to come to booking. Now! Reynolds stood up, annoyed. I have the Monitor coming any minute, Grady. I can't be dealing with... The Monitor is in booking, Captain. Grady said, his face pale. Miller arrested him. Reynolds felt the room spin. Say that again. Officer Miller arrested Marcus Thorne. He's in cuffs downstairs. He's refusing to let us take them off until you see him. Reynolds didn't run. He sprinted. He burst into the booking area to find a tableau that would haunt his nightmares. His newest problem officer, Brody Miller, looking like he wanted to vomit. And Marcus Thorne, the man with the power to dissolve the department's leadership, standing in handcuffs, looking like a statue of judgment. Reynolds slowed down as he approached, holding his hands up in surrender. Mr. Thorne, Reynolds gasped. I am Captain Reynolds. I am so incredibly sorry. There are no words. He turned to Miller. Give me the key. Now. Miller fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them. Reynolds snatched them off the floor, unlocked the cuffs, and threw them onto the desk with a clatter. Thorne rubbed his wrists. Deep red grooves marked his skin. He looked at the captain. Captain Reynolds, Thorne said. I assume this is Officer Miller. He gestured to the terrified young man. He arrested me for sitting on a park bench. He refused to look at my federal credentials. He used force on a compliance subject. And he did it all because a neighbor called in a suspicious black man. He will be dealt with, sir. Immediately, Reynolds promised. I'll drive you back to your hotel. We can discuss this. We will discuss this, Thorne said, but not in your office. We will discuss this in federal court. I want copies of the dispatch log, the body camera footage, the booking record, and Officer Miller's personnel file delivered to my office by 5:00 p.m. Do I make myself clear? Crystal clear, sir. And, Captain, Thorne adjusted his tie, smoothing the silk. I'm still conducting my audit, but I think I've seen enough for today. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The body camera footage was released within 48 hours. It showed everything: the calm professional eating a sandwich, the aggressive officer escalating for no reason, the clear identification offered and ignored. The video went viral globally. Federal Monitor arrested while monitoring police was the headline on CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera. The juxtaposition of Thorne's dignity and Miller's thuggery was impossible to defend. Do you think officers who make false arrests should be personally liable for the damages? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Officer Brody Miller was fired 4 days later. The internal investigation was the fastest in the department's history. He was decertified by the state of South Carolina, meaning he could never work in law enforcement again. But his firing didn't stop the bleeding. The lawsuit Thorne filed was a masterclass in civil rights litigation. It didn't just target Miller. It targeted the training, the supervision, and the culture that allowed Miller to exist. The city attorneys took one look at the evidence and the reputation of the plaintiff and folded. They settled for $6.4 million. It was one of the largest individual settlements for a wrongful arrest in state history. But the money was the least of the department's problems. Because of the arrest, the Department of Justice removed the voluntary status of the audit and imposed a strict court-enforceable consent decree. The North Charleston Police Department was effectively placed under federal receivership. Every policy was rewritten. Every officer had to undergo 40 hours of new bias training. A civilian oversight board was established with subpoena power. And the man overseeing it all, Marcus Thorne, he didn't recuse himself. He stayed on his authority now, absolute, ensuring that every promise of reform was kept. Eleanor Vance, the caller, was not spared. While she wasn't charged with a crime, making a biased call was not technically illegal at the time her name was leaked in the unredacted police report. She became a pariah in her own neighborhood. Her curated world crumbled as neighbors stopped speaking to her, ashamed to be associated with the woman who tried to weaponize the police against a federal official. She eventually sold her Victorian home and moved to a gated community in Florida, blaming cancel culture for her disgrace, never understanding that the rot was in her own heart. 6 months later, Marcus Thorne stood at a podium in the city's town hall. The room was packed. He wasn't wearing handcuffs this time. He was speaking to a graduating class of new police recruits. The atmosphere was heavy with history. "Some of you know me as the man who sued this city." Thorne began, his voice quiet, but carrying to the back of the room. "Some of you know me as the $6 million man. But I want you to remember me as something else. I want you to remember me as the man on the bench." He paused, looking at the young faces, diverse and eager. "I had a badge in my pocket that day," Thorne continued. "I had the power of the United States government behind me. I had the knowledge of the law, and none of it stopped Officer Miller from seeing me as a threat. None of it stopped the handcuffs. If it can happen to me, imagine what happens to the janitor, the teacher, the mechanic who sits on that bench. They don't have my badge. They don't have my lawyers. They just have their dignity. And it is your job, your sacred duty, to protect that dignity, not strip it away." The room was silent. "Justice is not a concept," Thorne said. "It is an action. It is what you do when you are tired, when you are angry, when you are scared. Do not be Brody Miller. Be the officer who asks a question before he issues an order. Be the officer who sees a neighbor, not a suspect." The story of Marcus Thorne and Brody Miller is a reminder that authority without wisdom is tyranny. It is a reminder that the systems we trust are only as good as the people who enforce them. Officer Miller saw a black man and assumed the worst. He didn't just lose his job, he cost his community its trust and its treasure. What do you think needs to change to prevent this from happening again? Is it training? Is it hiring? Or is it something deeper in our culture? If this story moved you, if you believe in holding power accountable, please subscribe to the channel. We will keep bringing you these stories because silence is where injustice hides. Thank you for watching and stay safe out there.
Ma'am, I've told you twice. Identify yourself. You're being suspicious.
I'm walking my dog on a public street. That is not a crime.
Failure to ID is obstruction. Turn around. Hands behind your back now.
You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights and you're...
The woman was Judge Evelyn Haynes. At 54 years old, Evelyn was a pillar of the legal community. She was known among her peers for an intellect that was as sharp as a scalpel and a demeanor that could silence a chaotic courtroom with a single stern look over her reading glasses. She had prosecuted high-profile homicides in her 30s, moved to corporate defense in her 40s, and now in her 50s, she presided over family court with a firm but compassionate hand. She was the kind of woman who woke up at 5:00 a.m. to read case briefs before her morning coffee. She was precise, she was dignified, and she was currently enjoying her day off. That morning, Evelyn was dressed in a simple navy tracksuit and running shoes, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. In her left hand, she held the leather leash of Bruno, her 7-year-old German Shepherd. Bruno was a retired police dog she had adopted 3 years prior, a gentle giant who moved with the same disciplined grace as his owner. They had walked this specific route every morning for 10 years. The neighbors knew them. The mail carriers knew them. The landscape crews waved when they passed. It was a routine etched into the fabric of Evelyn's life, a moment of peace before the heavy emotional toll of hearing custody battles and domestic violence cases. But Officer Tyler Vance didn't know any of that. He didn't see a judge. He didn't see a neighbor. He saw a black woman in a tracksuit walking slowly through an affluent neighborhood at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning looking at houses. In his mind, she wasn't admiring the architecture or checking to see if the rhododendrons were blooming. She was casing the joint. Vance was 28 years old and had been with the department for barely 18 months. He had transferred from a smaller rural agency where he had acquired a reputation for high arrest numbers, a metric he was proud of, even if his previous supervisors found his methods overly aggressive. He was looking to make a name for himself in the city. He wanted good collars, the kind that led to felony charges and commendations. As he adjusted his utility belt and began his approach, he wasn't thinking about the Fourth Amendment or the concept of reasonable suspicion. He was thinking that he had spotted something out of place. Before we continue with this harrowing encounter, I need you to take a second and check something for me, the narrator's voice would later say over the viral breakdown of this footage. Are you subscribed? Stories like this happen every day, and we are dedicated to exposing the truth. Hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Do you think officers should be required to articulate a crime before stopping a citizen? Let's get back to the scene. Evelyn heard the heavy boots on the pavement behind her before she heard the voice. She didn't turn immediately. She assumed it was a delivery driver or perhaps a landscaper. It wasn't until the voice cut through the morning air, sharp and commanding, that she stopped. "Hey, hold up a second." Evelyn paused and commanded Bruno to sit. The dog complied instantly, his ears perking up, but his body relaxed. Evelyn turned slowly. She saw the uniform first, the crisp blue shirt, the polished badge reflecting the morning sun, the hand resting casually but intentionally near the holster. She looked at the face above the uniform. Young, tight-jawed, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. She knew the type. She had seen dozens of officers like him testify in her courtroom, young men who mistook intimidation for authority. "Can I help you, officer?" Evelyn asked. Her voice was calm, the same leveled tone she used when overruling an objection. Vance stopped about 6 feet away. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a greeting. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on the dog, then back to her face. "You live around here?" Vance asked. It wasn't a polite inquiry. It was a challenge. Evelyn felt the familiar prickle of irritation, a heat rising at the base of her neck. She had lived in the corner house on Elm Street for a decade. Her mortgage was paid off. Her property taxes helped pay this officer's salary. "I do," Evelyn replied. She didn't elaborate. She didn't offer her address. She didn't owe him that. Not yet. Vance shifted his weight. He didn't like the brevity of her answer. He was used to people scrambling to explain themselves, nervous energy radiating off them when a cop approached. This woman wasn't nervous. She stood with a posture that was almost regal, looking down her nose at him despite being shorter. "We've had some reports of break-ins in this area recently." Vance lied. There had been no reports. Just checking on people who don't look familiar. "What's your address?" Evelyn tightened her grip on the leash, not out of fear, but out of resolve. "Officer, I am walking my dog on a public street in broad daylight. Unless you are accusing me of a specific crime, I am not obligated to provide you with my personal information." The silence that followed Evelyn's statement was heavy, filled only by the distant hum of a lawnmower and the chirping of birds. Officer Tyler Vance's jaw tightened visibly. In his 18 months on the force and his 2 years prior in the rural county, he had rarely encountered resistance. Compliance was the currency of the street, and he expected to be paid in full. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave, losing the pretense of a casual inquiry and taking on the hard edge of a command. Ma'am, I'm conducting an investigation into suspicious activity. That requires you to identify yourself. Failure to do so can be considered obstruction. Evelyn almost laughed, but she held it back. The legal inaccuracy of his statement was staggering. She had written opinions on Terry vs. Ohio. She had dismissed cases where officers had manufactured suspicion out of thin air. Walking while black is not suspicious activity, officer. Evelyn said, her voice remaining terrifyingly level. And Brown v. Texas clearly establishes that you cannot stop and demand identification from a citizen without specific objective facts indicating that they are involved in criminal activity. You have no such facts. You have a woman walking a dog. Vance stepped closer. This was his tactic: invade the personal space, escalate the pressure until the subject cracked. I don't need a law lecture. I need to see ID. Now. You're looking into driveways. You're moving slow in a high-theft area that's suspicious. Now, are you going to cooperate, or are we going to have a problem? The only problem here, Evelyn said, is that you are currently violating my Fourth Amendment rights. I am not casing houses. I am looking at my neighbor's gardens because I am a gardener. I am walking slowly because my dog is 7 years old and has hip dysplasia. Those are innocent behaviors that you have chosen to interpret through a lens of bias. Vance's hand moved to his radio. He clicked the mic. Dispatch, show me out with a suspicious female subject, elm and maple. Subject is non-compliant. Evelyn watched him, her mind racing through the procedural chessboard. She knew exactly where this was going. She could give him her ID. She could pull out the wallet tucked in her waistband, show him her driver's license, and likely her judicial credentials, which were right behind it. That would end it. He would see Honorable Evelyn Haynes. He would turn pale. He would stammer an apology, and she would walk away. But Evelyn Haynes was not just a judge. She was a woman of principle. If she showed her badge now, she would be saving herself, but she would be validating his behavior. She would be teaching him that he was right to stop her and that only her status saved her. What about the nurse walking home from a shift? What about the student? What about the people who didn't have a badge to shield them? I am not a subject, Evelyn stated firmly. I am a citizen, and I'm asking you again, what is the specific articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime? I told you. Vance snapped, his patience evaporating. Loitering, prowling. Now let's see the ID. Across the street, the front door of a white colonial house opened. Martha Higgins, a 62-year-old retired schoolteacher, stepped onto her porch. Martha had lived across from Evelyn for 8 years. They exchanged Christmas cards. They complained about the homeowners association fees together. Martha held her phone in her hand, the camera app already open. She had seen the cruiser pull up. She had seen the aggressive posture of the officer. She knew Evelyn, and she knew something was wrong. Is everything okay, Evelyn? Martha called out, her voice projecting clearly across the lawn. Vance whipped his head around. Ma'am, go back inside. This is police business. I'm on my own property, officer. Martha yelled back, showing a spine of steel that decades of managing middle schoolers had forged. And I'm recording that is Judge Haynes you are harassing. Vance froze. The words Judge Haynes hung in the air for a split second, but his brain flooded with adrenaline, and the tunnel vision of a confrontation rejected the information. Judge. This woman in a tracksuit. Impossible. The neighbor was lying, or she was confused. He was too deep in now. If he backed down because a neighbor yelled at him, he'd look weak. He'd lose control of the scene. He turned back to Evelyn, his face flushing red. I don't care who you are. You're refusing a lawful order. It is not a lawful order. Evelyn corrected him, her eyes locking onto his mirrored sunglasses. It is an unlawful detention, and if you touch me, you will be facing a federal civil rights lawsuit that will end your career. Do you understand me? Vance's ego couldn't take it. The neighbor recording the woman lecturing him the challenge to his authority. He made the decision that would ruin his life. "Turn around," Vance barked. "Hands behind your back." "For what?" Evelyn demanded, not moving. "Failure to identify. Resisting an officer. Turn around now. Turn around." Evelyn looked at him with a mixture of pity and fury. "I am going to comply because I do not want to be shot. But you are making a mistake that you cannot undo." She dropped the leash. "Bruno, stay," she commanded softly. The dog whined but remained seated, his training overriding his instinct to protect. Vance grabbed Evelyn's wrist. He wasn't gentle. He wrenched her arm behind her back with excessive force, twisting the shoulder. Evelyn winced but didn't cry out. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked onto her left wrist, then her right. "You're hurting her," Martha screamed from the porch running down her driveway, now phone held high. "She has arthritis. Stop it. Back up." Vance shouted at Martha, one hand on Evelyn's arm, the other pointing a finger at the older white woman. "Back up or you're next." The scene on the corner of Elm and Maple had transformed from a quiet suburban morning into a spectacle. A landscaping crew 2 houses down had turned off their leaf blowers and were watching in stunned silence. A delivery truck had slowed to a crawl, and in the center of it all, Officer Tyler Vance was tightening handcuffs on a woman who had signed search warrants for his precinct less than 48 hours ago. Evelyn stood straight, despite the pain in her shoulders. The metal cuffs were biting into her skin. Vance had applied them too tightly, a petty, punitive measure common among officers who felt disrespected. "Officer," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "my dog. You cannot leave him here." Vance looked down at the German Shepherd. Bruno was vibrating with anxiety, a low growl forming in his throat as he watched his owner being restrained. "I'll call animal control," Vance muttered, reaching for his radio. "You will not—" Martha's voice cut in. She had stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, respecting the physical boundary, but pushing the verbal one. "I will take him. That is Bruno. I know him." Vance glared at Martha. "Do not interfere, lady." "I am not interfering," Martha snapped. "I am preventing you from traumatizing a service animal. Evelyn, do you want me to take Bruno?" "Yes, Martha, please," Evelyn said, looking at her neighbor. "Take him to your house. Call my husband. Tell him I'm being taken to the North Precinct." Vance scoffed. "You don't know where you're going." "I know exactly where I'm going," Evelyn said, her eyes shifting back to Vance. "I know the jurisdiction. I know the processing procedures. And I know that Sergeant Frank Miller is the watch commander on duty this morning. I suggest you radio ahead and tell him you're bringing in a prisoner." Vance paused. He actually did know Sergeant Miller was on duty. How did she know that? A flicker of doubt sparked in his chest, but he smothered it. She probably had a rap sheet, knew the cops from being arrested before. That explained the legal jargon. Criminals were getting smarter, he told himself. They watched TV. They learned the words. "Grab the dog," Vance spat at Martha. "But stay away from the vehicle." Martha stepped forward cautiously. "Come here, Bruno. Come on, boy." The dog hesitated, looking at Evelyn. Evelyn nodded. "Go, Bruno. Go with Martha." The dog slumped his tail between his legs and allowed Martha to take the leash. Vance grabbed Evelyn's arm and marched her toward the cruiser. He didn't use the proper escort technique. He shoved her slightly. He opened the back door and pushed her inside. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving. The interior smelled of stale sweat and industrial cleaner. As the door slammed shut, sealing her inside the cage, Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment. She wasn't afraid. She was beyond fear. She was in a place of cold, calculating fury. She began to catalog everything. The time, 10:42 a.m. The temperature, approximately 72 degrees. The officer's name tag, T. Vance. The force used, excessive. The legal basis, non-existent. Vance got into the driver's seat. He was breathing hard, the adrenaline dump making his hands shake slightly. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring right back at him, her expression unreadable. "You really think you're smart, don't you?" Vance taunted as he put the car in gear. "Refusing to ID, making a scene. Now you got a record." Evelyn didn't respond to the taunt. She simply asked, "Are your body camera and dash camera active and recording?" "Yeah, they're recording," Vance said, pulling away from the curb. "Recording you acting like a lunatic." "Good," Evelyn said. "Do not turn them off, not for a second." The ride to the station took 15 minutes. Vance played loud rock music on the radio, a petty attempt to make her uncomfortable. Evelyn sat in silence, meditating. She thought about the countless defendants who had stood before her claiming police misconduct. She thought about how often she had given officers the benefit of the doubt, assuming that in the heat of the moment they had acted reasonably. She realized with a sinking feeling in her gut that she might have been wrong more often than she cared to admit. They pulled into the sally port of the North Precinct. The heavy metal garage door rolled down behind them, sealing out the sunlight. Vance parked the car and killed the engine. "Let's go," he said, opening the back door. He hauled her out. Evelyn's legs were stiff. Her shoulders ached. He walked her through the secure hallway past the holding cells and into the processing area. It was a large room with fluorescent lighting, linoleum floors, and a high booking desk. Behind the desk sat Sergeant Frank Miller. Frank was 58, a 30-year veteran of the force. He had gray hair, a thick mustache, and a weariness that came from 3 decades of seeing the worst of humanity. He was looking down at paperwork when the door opened. "Got a refusal to ID resisting and obstruction," Vance announced proudly, pushing Evelyn forward. "Subject was casing houses in Oak Creek." Frank didn't look up immediately. "Oak Creek. We don't usually get prowlers up there this time of day. Did you get a name?" "Refused," Vance said. "Claimed she didn't have to." Frank sighed. He hated these kinds of arrests. Usually a waste of paperwork. He looked up, adjusting his glasses, prepared to give the subject the standard speech about cooperation. His eyes landed on the woman in handcuffs. For a moment, Frank's brain simply stopped working. He blinked. He looked at the face. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked at Vance, who was grinning like a hunter with a prize buck. Then he looked back at the woman. He knew that face. He had spent hundreds of hours looking at that face from the witness stand. He had signed warrants in front of her. He had seen her destroy defense attorneys with a single question. Frank stood up so fast his chair flew backward and hit the wall with a loud crack. "Holy!" Frank started, but cut himself off. His face went pale, then red. He came around the desk moving faster than he had in years. "Vance," Frank said, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. "What did you do? What?" Vance looked confused. "I told you she was resisting. She—" "Unlock those cuffs," Frank barked. It wasn't a request. It was a roar. "Unlock them right now. Sarge, she's a suspect, she—" "That is Judge Haynes," Frank screamed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "That is a sitting judge. Get those cuffs off her now." The silence that followed Sergeant Frank Miller's scream was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Every other officer in the booking area, a corporal at the fingerprint scanner, a patrolman drinking coffee, a civilian clerk, froze. All eyes turned to the trio in the center of the room. Officer Tyler Vance looked as if he had been struck in the face with a shovel. His confident smirk dissolved into a mask of confusion and dawning horror. He looked at Sergeant Frank, whose face was purple with rage, and then he looked slowly at the woman he had just dragged across town in the back of his car. Evelyn hadn't moved. She stood with her chin raised, her eyes boring into Vance's soul. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that the air practically crackled. She... Vance stammered. His hands were shaking as he reached for his keyring. He fumbled with the keys, dropping them once. "Pick them up," Evelyn said. It was the first time she had spoken since entering the station. Her voice was low-cold and commanded total obedience. Vance picked up the keys. It took him 3 tries to get the small metal key into the lock on her left wrist. Click. The ratchet released. He moved to the right wrist. Click. Evelyn brought her hands in front of her. She rubbed her wrists slowly. There were deep red indentations where the metal had dug in. The skin was abraded. "Judge Haynes," Sergeant Frank said, stepping in front of Vance as if to shield the younger officer from the blast radius, or perhaps to shield the judge from the officer. "Your Honor, I don't even have the words. I am so incredibly sorry. There is no excuse." Evelyn looked at Frank. She softened just a fraction. She knew Frank. He was a good officer, an old-school cop who respected the law. "Sergeant Miller," Evelyn said, "I would like to see the watch commander's log. I want the exact time of arrival documented, and I want this officer removed from my presence immediately." "Vance, get in my office," Frank hissed, not looking back at him. "Now, sit down. Don't touch anything. Don't speak to anyone." Vance walked toward the glass-walled office like a man walking to the gallows. He looked back once, and Evelyn met his gaze. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a promise of reckoning. "Your Honor, please come sit down," Frank said, gesturing to a chair in the staff break area away from the holding cells. "Can I get you water, coffee, ice for your wrists?" "I want photographs of my wrists first," Evelyn said. "Before anything else, do you have a camera, Sergeant?" "Yes, ma'am. I'll take them myself." Frank retrieved the evidence camera. He took detailed photos of the bruising, the swelling. He treated it like a homicide crime scene. He knew that these photos would be Exhibit A in a lawsuit that was going to cost the city millions. "Who is the chief on duty?" Evelyn asked as Frank finished. "Chief Reynolds is on the golf course, Your Honor. It's Tuesday." "Get him off the golf course," Evelyn said. "Tell him he needs to be here 20 minutes ago." While Frank made the frantic phone call, Evelyn sat in the hard plastic chair. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a dull ache in her shoulders and a throbbing headache. She closed her eyes. She thought about Bruno. She hoped Martha had gotten him home safely. She thought about her husband David, a retired surgeon who was probably losing his mind right now. "Your Honor." Evelyn opened her eyes. Frank was holding a phone. "Chief Reynolds is on the line. He wants to speak with you." Evelyn took the phone. "This is Judge Haynes." "Judge Evelyn, my God." The chief's voice came through breathless and panicked. "Frank just told me. I am in the car. I'm doing 90 on the freeway. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Please tell me you're okay." "I am not okay, Jim," Evelyn said, using his first name intentionally. "I was kidnapped from my neighborhood. I was assaulted. I was profiled. And I'm currently sitting in your booking room with bruises on my wrists." I know. I am so sorry. We're going to fix this. We're going to make this right. Just please don't leave until I get there." "I'm not going anywhere," Evelyn said. "I have a statement to give. And Jim, you better bring the city attorney with you." She handed the phone back to Frank. Across the room, inside the glass office, Officer Vance was sitting with his head in his hands. He was beginning to realize that the suspicious person he had stopped was the most powerful person he had ever met. Evelyn reached into her pocket. Vance hadn't even patted her down properly, another violation, and pulled out her phone. She had missed calls from Martha and David. She texted David, "I am at North Precinct. I am safe. Come get me. Bring my briefcase." She needed her briefcase. It contained her laptop, her notes, and her seal. If they wanted a judge, she would give them a judge. She wasn't just a victim now. She was the plaintiff, the prosecutor, and the jury all rolled into one. The door to the precinct flew open 15 minutes later. Chief Jim Reynolds, still wearing a polo shirt and golf slacks, burst in. He was sweating. He ignored his officers and went straight to Evelyn. "Judge," he said, extending a hand, then pulling it back, unsure if he was allowed to touch her. I don't even know where to start. Start by preserving the evidence, Evelyn said, standing up. I want a preservation order issued immediately for Officer Vance's body camera footage, dash camera footage, GPS data, and radio logs. I want the dispatch recordings, and I want his personnel file pulled and placed on your desk. Done. Already done, Reynolds said. We're initiating an internal affairs investigation immediately. He's being placed on administrative leave as of right now. Administrative leave? Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Paid vacation for false arrest and assault on a federal magistrate. She wasn't federal, but she let the weight of her title hang there. It's protocol, Evelyn. You know the union contracts. But I promise you he is done. He will never wear a badge in this city again. He shouldn't wear a badge anywhere, Evelyn said. But that is a battle for tomorrow. Right now, I want to go home. I'll drive you, Reynolds offered. No, Evelyn said. My husband is outside. Through the glass doors, she saw David's car pulling up, followed closely by a news van. Evelyn sighed. Martha. Martha had called the press. Reynolds saw the van too and groaned. Oh, Christ. You have a press conference to prepare for, Chief, Evelyn said. I suggest you tell the truth. Because if you spin this, if you try to say I was uncooperative or that it was a misunderstanding, I will release the cell phone video my neighbor took, and I will burn this department to the ground legally. Reynolds nodded, looking defeated. We'll tell the truth. Evelyn walked out of the station. The sun was blinding after the dim light of the holding area. David ran to her, wrapping her in a hug. She winced as he touched her shoulders. Did they hurt you? David asked, his voice shaking with rage. I'm okay, Evelyn said. She looked at the reporter setting up a camera on the sidewalk. She straightened her tracksuit jacket. She smoothed her hair. She lifted her chin. Let's go home, David. I have a lawsuit to draft. The lawsuit filed 3 days later in the United States District Court was a masterclass in civil rights litigation. It was titled Haynes v. City of Metro et al., but the media quickly dubbed it the judge's judgment. The filing didn't just allege a bad arrest. It dissected the systemic failure of the police department. It cited the lack of reasonable suspicion, the excessive force, the unlawful seizure, and the racial profiling that motivated the stop. But what truly ignited the firestorm was the release of the video footage. Evelyn's legal team, led by a shark of a civil rights attorney named Marcus Thorne, released the synchronized video. On the left side of the screen was Martha's cell phone footage, shaky but clear, showing a calm woman being manhandled. On the right side was Officer Vance's body camera. The public saw Vance's aggressive approach. They heard his sneering tone. They heard Evelyn's calm, articulate invocation of the law. They watched as he twisted the arms of a 54-year-old woman and shoved her into a car because she dared to know her rights. The internet exploded. The video had 10 million views in 48 hours. Comment sections were filled with outrage. If they do this to a judge, what are they doing to our kids? He didn't even know the law he was trying to enforce. Fire him. Charge him. The city attorney, a pragmatic woman named Sarah Jenkins, watched the video in her office with her head in her hands. She called the mayor. We have to settle, Jenkins said. We cannot go to trial. If we put Evelyn Haynes on the stand with that video, the jury will give her the entire city budget. She's not just a sympathetic victim. She's an expert witness in her own case. How bad is it? The mayor asked. It's indefensible, and it gets worse. We pulled Vance's data. The investigation into Officer Tyler Vance had opened a Pandora's box. The internal affairs team, under pressure from the chief and the public, dug deep. They found that in his 18 months, Vance had made 42 stops in Evelyn's neighborhood. 38 of them were Black or Hispanic people. Most were delivery drivers, contractors, or residents. He had a pattern. He hunted in that zip code. He used suspicious person as a catch-all for person of color in a rich neighborhood. Furthermore, they found body cam footage from 2 months prior where Vance had referred to the neighborhood as the jungle, while talking to another officer joking about cleaning up the trash. When this information leaked, as it inevitably does, the protests started. People gathered outside the police station. They marched through Oak Creek Estates. Evelyn watched it all from her living room. She was on medical leave from the bench, her shoulder requiring physical therapy. Bruno sat at her feet. She wasn't happy about the protests. She wasn't happy about the chaos. She believed in the law. She believed in order. But she knew that sometimes order had to be disrupted to be restored. She received a letter from Vance. It was handwritten, delivered through his union rep. It was a desperate, rambling apology, blaming his training, his stress, his fear. Evelyn read it once, then fed it into the shredder. Apologies without change were just noise. The police union, usually staunch defenders of their own, abandoned Vance. The video was too damning. The victim was too powerful. They issued a statement saying Vance's actions did not reflect the values of the membership. It was the death knell for his career. 6 weeks after the incident, the disciplinary tribunal met. Vance was terminated for cause. He was stripped of his certification, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. But Evelyn wasn't done. She pushed for the settlement, not for the money, but for the terms. The settlement negotiations took place in a high-rise conference room overlooking the city. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, flanked by her attorney. Across from her were the city attorney, the police chief, and the mayor. The city is prepared to offer $1 million, the city attorney said, with no admission of liability. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. I don't care about the admission of liability. The video is the admission, and I don't just want money. What do you want, Judge? The mayor asked. I want policy, Evelyn said. I want a mandatory requirement that officers must articulate the specific crime suspected on their body camera before they initiate a Terry stop. If they can't say it to the camera, they can't stop the citizen. That's a significant operational change, the chief said. It's the law, Evelyn countered. I'm just asking you to enforce it. I also want an independent civilian review board for all bias complaints, and I want Officer Vance's termination to be public and permanent with a report sent to the National Decertification Index so he doesn't just go 2 counties over and do this to someone else. The room was quiet. The demands were steep, but the alternative was a public trial where Judge Evelyn Haynes would dissect the department on national television. Agreed, the mayor said. And the money? Evelyn asked. $1.5 million, the city attorney offered, trying to close it. $2 million, Evelyn said. And I want it paid within 30 days. And they settled for $1.8 million. Evelyn didn't keep a dime. She established the Bruno Fund, named after the dog that Vance had wanted to send to the pound. The fund provided legal representation for indigent defendants who had been victims of police misconduct. It paid for expert witnesses, private investigators, and civil rights attorneys for people who didn't have a law degree or a judicial title. The day the settlement was signed, Evelyn returned to work. Walking into the courthouse was different now. The deputies at the security checkpoint stood a little straighter. They greeted her with a reverence that was tinged with fear. They knew what she had done. They knew she was not to be trifled with. She entered her chambers and put on her robe. The black silk felt heavy but comforting. It was her armor. She walked into her courtroom. The bailiff cried out, "All rise!" Everyone stood, the lawyers, the litigants, the clerks. Evelyn climbed the steps to the bench. She looked out at the room. She saw the faces of the people waiting for justice. She saw a young black man in the back row looking nervous. She thought about Officer Vance. She thought about how close she had come to being just another statistic. If she hadn't been a judge, if she hadn't known the case law, if Martha hadn't filmed, she would have been charged with resisting arrest. She would have had a criminal record. She would have lost her job. She sat down. "Be seated." The room settled. Evelyn looked at the first file. It was a custody case. A father fighting to see his children. "Call the first case," Evelyn said. Her voice was strong. It was the voice of authority. But underneath it, there was a new layer of empathy. She knew now in a visceral way what it felt like to be powerless. She knew what it felt like to have the state's boot on your neck. That evening, Evelyn walked Bruno again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across Oak Creek Estates. A patrol car drove by a different officer. He slowed down. He waved respectfully. Evelyn nodded back. She wasn't safe because the system had changed overnight. She was safe because she had forced the system to see her. But as she walked, she looked at the houses, the quiet streets, and she knew the work wasn't done. She stopped at the corner where it had happened. She looked at the pavement. There was no mark, no sign of the violence, but she remembered. "Come on, Bruno," she whispered. "Let's go home." Note: I combined the narrative arc so the story flowed naturally into the conclusion in Part 6, but to fulfill the 8-part structure requested, I will expand on the deeper investigation and the aftermath details that were glossed over, effectively splitting the density of the previous events. Retconning slightly to expand the investigation phase which would fit between the filing and the settlement. Let's step back to the weeks before the settlement. The investigation into the police department had revealed rot that went deeper than Vance. The Department of Justice, DOJ, had taken notice of the lawsuit. While Evelyn recovered at home, federal investigators arrived in Metro City. They weren't just interested in Vance. They were interested in the supervisors who had enabled him. They interviewed Sergeant Frank Miller. Frank, honest to a fault, admitted that Vance's aggressive numbers had been praised by upper management before the incident. Stats over strategy, Frank had called it. The DOJ report released 2 weeks before the settlement was scathing. It detailed a culture of impunity where officers were encouraged to make pretextual stops in affluent neighborhoods to keep the riffraff out. The report vindicated Evelyn completely, but it also brought her a sense of profound sadness. She sat in her study reading the 200-page document. She read the stories of other citizens, a teacher, a dentist, a college student who had been stopped by Vance and his squad. They hadn't been judges. They had been intimidated into consenting to searches. They had been ticketed for non-existent infractions. Evelyn realized her lawsuit had to be about them. That was when she decided to add the stipulation about the Civilian Review Board. She met with community leaders in her living room, pastors, activists, mothers who had lost sons. "You have the power," one activist told her. "You have the voice they can't ignore." Evelyn looked at her hands, the wrists still faintly discolored. "I never asked for this," she said. "I just wanted to walk my dog." "But you were chosen," the pastor said, "because you could fight back." This period of reflection was crucial. It transformed Evelyn from a plaintiff into a crusader. It was why she was so hardline in the settlement meeting. She wasn't negotiating for herself. She was negotiating for the ghosts in the DOJ report. Conclusion and reflection. 6 months later. The Oak Creek Estates were quiet. The leaves were turning gold and red with the arrival of autumn. Evelyn walked Bruno, his gait a little slower, now his muzzle a little grayer. The settlement had been paid. The reforms were being implemented, albeit slowly. The Vance rule, the requirement for articulating suspicion on camera, was now standard operating procedure. Body cam activations had gone up 40%. Citizen complaints had dropped 15%. Officer Tyler Vance was working at a car dealership 3 towns over. He had tried to sue the department for wrongful termination, but no lawyer would take his case. The video was forever. He was a pariah. Evelyn stopped at Martha's house. Martha was on the porch knitting. "Morning, Judge." Martha smiled. "Morning, Martha," Evelyn replied. "Beautiful day." "It is." They didn't talk about the arrest much anymore. They didn't have to. The bond between them was unspoken but unbreakable. Martha had stood up when it mattered. That was enough. Evelyn continued her walk. She reached the end of the block and looked back. She thought about the fragile nature of justice. It wasn't a stone monument. It was a garden. It had to be tended, watered, and weeded constantly. If you looked away, the weeds of bias and power would take over. She had weeded her corner of the garden. As she turned back toward her house, a young police officer on a bicycle patrol rode by. He was black. He smiled at her. "Good morning, Judge Haynes." "Good morning, officer," she said. He rode on. Evelyn watched him go. A small hope bloomed in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, things were getting better. She unclipped Bruno's leash as they reached her driveway. The dog trotted to the front door, tail wagging. Evelyn took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. She was a judge. She was a black woman. She was a survivor. And she was free. This story reminds us that titles and robes do not shield anyone from bias, but the courage to stand up can change the world for everyone else. Evelyn Haynes fought not because she was a judge, but because she was a citizen who knew her worth. What would you have done in Evelyn's shoes? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have shown your badge immediately? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in holding power accountable, please like this story and share it. It helps us bring more truth to light. Thank you for reading.